Hey, welcome back here to Foodable's Taste Kitchen. I'm your host today, Paul Barron, and we're going to be, of course, breaking down one of the top things that we do every year is really go and look at the top 10 wines, well, really the top 100 from Wine Spectator, but we really dive into the top 10, and we usually do it with someone that I love to talk to. It's a great conversation every time we get together, and that is Emily Wines, who is a Master Sommelier at Cooper's Hawk Winery. Great to have you. Winery and restaurant, I should say, which I had a great meal at your restaurant in Pembroke Pines just here recently. Fabulous job you guys are doing. So great job over there at Cooper's Hawk.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back. I can't believe a year has passed so quickly.
Yeah, I know, right? I am happy it's passed quickly, but the last couple of months just felt like pulling teeth, though. It was one of those things, just let's get it over. Let's, come on, let's get something going here. Hey, Emily, I want to, as a Master Sommelier, I'm kind of curious, when you look, and I think a lot of people that I've talked to, we always talk about somms and, the benefits of one in a restaurant and all the great things that I think a sommelier brings to a restaurant concept. What does it take to become a Master Sommelier?
Well, you are certified through the Court of Master Sommeliers, and there's a series of exams that you take. The final one being the Master Sommelier Diploma, and that's a three-part examination that involves an exam on theory, which is all of the book study, so soil type, wine law, basically lots of really deep study and memorization, and not just wines. It's also about spirits and beer and other things. And then that's done orally at the master's level, and then there's the practical examination, which is a combination of service, so walking around to tables and decanting wine and opening champagne and recommending pairings, making cocktails. And then there's also a business of the sommelier portion of that that's a little bit seated. And then the final part is the blind tasting exam, which is 6 wines, 25 minutes to talk about what they look like, smell like, taste like, and identify them. Hopefully.
Interesting. I'm always so amazed whether we're at a tasting and over the years of really following the industry, I get a chance to meet some great wine experts, sommeliers. One thing that always impresses me is when a somm can taste a wine and literally drill down to the region with a full blind taste, and can drill down to a region of where that wine's from. That is just super fascinating to me. You've got to drink a lot of wine or at least taste a lot of wine to get to that level, for sure. Yeah. All right, so let's jump into our top 10 here from Wine Spectator. And really this is, just so the audience knows, it's basically just Emily and I kind of breaking them down, seeing what we think about them. I've had a chance to actually get to and taste all 10 wines. We had to kind of rush around to find these things. With exception of number 7 and number 3, which we have in front of us, and we're going to taste and pour those today. Number 10, which is the Bollinger Brut Champagne, La Grande. And of course, this is a 2012 with a score of 97. Price is $175. Kind of a current and ground coffee approach, at least that's what Wine Spectator tells us, with a little bit of a grapefruit peel and some kind of a finish with toasted almond. Your thoughts on that particular champagne?
This is actually one of my favorite champagnes. I've always been a really big fan of this style. I like champagnes that have a lot of Pinot Noir in them. To me, they really have this sort of apple cider kind of quality to them, whereas those that are more Chardonnay-led tend to be very citrusy and very, very bright and fresh. I love the richness and the complexity of this champagne, and Bollinger in particular, it makes a really just one of the most elegant styles of Pinot-driven champagne. This is 2/3 Pinot Noir in this cuvee, and really spectacular champagne.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's becoming somewhat of a trend, as we are seeing those blends that I think have really kind of opened up the palates of some consumers that maybe had not really thought about going in that direction. I mean, because a lot of people are going in the directions of a Veuve Clicquot or something of that nature, that it's kind of the everyday man's drinking champagne. I won't say that that's not an expensive champagne, and Veuve, don't hate on me. We love it. But I think this is opening up the palates of a lot of people, and I was glad to see it on the list. Number 9, let's get to it, which is the Beaux Frères Pinot Noir, which is a Ribbon Ridge Vineyard. I love this one, 2018. This is a 95. This one is more in my price range, which is about 95 to 100 bucks a bottle. This one is also when I look at different wines, and I like, you know, everything from Rombauer to King Estates, your own Cooper's Hawk Pinot Noir, which is a great product. I've always liked those fruit-forward wines, and I think this one is that way. But I found this one had a little bit more spiciness on the back end, which I think for the right kind of menu is good. What are your thoughts on it?
I love this wine. I actually am a big fan of this appellation. This is a really distinctive little microclimate within the Willamette Valley, and Beaux Frères is a great estate. They're making really elegant Pinot Noirs, and to me, this has that really classic Oregon Pinot quality that it almost reminds you of like walking through the forest and kicking up the underbrush, and like you smell that kind of woodsy character to it. There's a mushroomy, truffly note to it. There's a really beautiful contrast against that really exuberant fresh fruit. Lots of raspberry, rose petal. I love the balance in this wine.
You know, I always have this question brought to attention, and I don't know why everybody, when we go out to dinner with groups back in the day, you know, when you used to actually be able to go to dinner with groups,
right.
I always had a lot of people ask me, as if I'm supposed to be the wine expert, ask me if a light Pinot or a heavy Pinot, and there are a variety of ranges in the Pinot Noir. What is your thought on that? Because there's sometimes, and I've had a handful, even Rombauer, which has more of a heavier Pinot Noir. What is your thoughts on the variations of the Pinot blends themselves, and what a consumer or even a wine buyer might be looking for their particular menu?
Well, Pinot Noir, for one thing, it's a really finicky grape. It really prefers cooler climates, and because of that, you often find them with a lot of brighter acidity, not necessarily so full-bodied. There are some areas in California that get pretty warm, and so you can get some bigger, denser, richer styles of Pinot.
Right.
And it kind of depends on what your style is. I think there's a lot of American palates kind of go for the bigger is better approach, and there's plenty of Pinot Noirs that suit that palate. Although there's something to be said for those really beautiful, light, delicate, elegant Pinot Noirs too. It kind of depends on what you're eating. It depends on the style that you're looking for. If you want something that really kind of, you know, really is in your face, or if you want something that takes a little bit of sitting with and seeking.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I like them both, and I meant to say Paul Hobbs is the one that I'm really intrigued with, which is a great one. And we've had them on this show before, and it's a great tasting wine. I was introduced to it for the first time and really kind of fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Let's go to number 8, which is the Bodega Piedra. This is interesting to me. It's a 2015. It's a score of 96, 100 bucks a bottle. I didn't know much about this wine. I was kind of, I had to go do some research on it. It was one I've never seen, I've never heard of, I've never seen at tasting events. Is it something that it just doesn't get a lot of press, or what was kind of I just don't know. It's kind of an unknown to me.
Yeah, I would say this producer is fairly unknown. I think most people are familiar with Malbec from Argentina, more specifically from Mendoza, very high altitude. And Mendoza is a pretty big region. It's almost like saying California. It's really quite big. Okay. And there's a lot of different subregions. And within Mendoza, the Uco Valley is the most famous. That's sort of like the Grand Cru of Mendoza. And then within the Uco Valley, this producer, which is actually, this winery was purchased by Francois Lurton, who's most famous for his work in Bordeaux in the Entre-deux-Mers region. He purchased this estate, and he actually started planting vineyards where there was nothing planted before. It's this super high altitude desert, and it was just like the perfect combination of soil and climate to make some really spectacular wines. And these wines that he made in this Chacayes region actually were so spectacular. More producers have sort of come into this area, and Chacayes is now its own DO within the Uco Valley. So it's sort of like a sub-region, sort of like how Ribbon Ridge is a sub-region of the Willamette Valley. So beautiful wine.
Yeah, love. When I got a chance to taste it for the first time, it was like, wow, okay, this is definitely. Well, even though I do have some favorites that I felt should have been in the top 10. I'll talk about that on another episode, but
It's tough.
today
There's just so many great wines.
well, to get to 10, you're right. It is a
Yeah,
hard
sure.
list to break into those. So, I feel for the guys at Wine Spectator who have to do this every year. All right, let's move on to our next wine, and that is our number
Yeah.
7, and that is the
And you've got
Massolino
some right there.
Barolo. I've got it. I'm going to open it. This one, a 95 score, but it was probably one of the best values in the top 10 at $53.
Yeah.
This is an interesting wine. I've not had a taste of it yet, but I was doing a ton of research on this one just because I thought, wow, this is a good value, I think, for if somebody was looking at going into a Barolo, for using it on a wine list in a restaurant, because this is, you have to have approachable wines on your wine list. Your thoughts on this one? What do you think about this guy?
I mean, to be honest, of all the wines that were in this top 10, this was the one that came as the biggest surprise to me. And it's, I guess, because in part I just always associated with this wine as just being a really good value Barolo. And you're right, for a restaurant, this was something that was easy to put on the list because it could be pretty approachable price wise. Massolino is pretty famous for their single vineyard Barolos. And so again,
Okay.
the other surprise was that what was selected was this kind of straightforward Barolo, a little bit of a blend of a few of those different single vineyards. But the wine's fantastic. I had a chance to revisit it, and it's drinking great. I mean, and honestly, to find this great of a Barolo for this price is pretty nice, because these days
Yeah.
they've started to get pretty dear.
Well, I'm going to get a taste of this one for the first time.
All
And
right.
I always love to do all the research, because even though I feel like it does set an expectation for a wine, but I feel like it also helps me before doing a taste of really understanding some of those hidden notes that I think a lot of people that are much more have much more expertise at this understand, and I feel like in the mind, at least for me, it kind of brings those out in understanding a wine. Do you recommend that for someone who's really getting into wine as an enthusiast, or even as a wine buyer and a bar manager who says, hey, you should really educate people on the wine before or when you're trying to sell it to them and make them or help them, I should say, understand what to expect?
Yeah. I mean, it's always an interesting thing. I mean, this is one of those wines that, one of the challenges I think sometimes with Barolo, especially a younger Barolo like this, is that, man, those tannins are intense. I can see it in your face.
Wow.
Your face just is shutting down right there. That's
Woo.
Nebbiolo for you. I mean, that's some powerful stuff.
Okay.
I mean, that's the thing about this wine, is that there's a couple things, and this is what I would educate anybody who is ordering this in the restaurant is, first of all, this wine's pretty young, and with time that will continue to soften and develop. But even right now, this is a great wine, but you have to have it with food. It's, especially something with a little bit of fat to it, it'll coat your mouth, and then those tannins, as opposed to really dominating, will really meld with the flavors.
Yeah,
here.
that's definitely the point. I think you hit it on the head. I mean, because sometimes you can give a wine, or if this is a tasting wine, I think this would shock some people.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. If you get a great salmon or even a steak with a nice ribeye or something like that, now you're in the right spot for it, because your palate's definitely going to be able to receive that much better. Tannins are there, but yet the tasting element of it, it definitely has. This one is a little bit more hearty to me. When I look at Barolos, a lot of times they're very sweet. And in many cases, they kind of have almost that fruit-forward approach. This one seems to have a little bit more heartiness, more earthiness into it. Is that something you recommend in a Barolo, or do you feel like people lean toward, the sweeter, fruitier ones?
Well, Barolo tends to be much more muscular. Barbaresco are often a little bit rounder and softer. So there's some subtle differences between them. Same grape, but also Nebbiolo is really tricky. It's, you can't compare it. If you were going to compare it to French grapes, it's more like Pinot Noir than it is like Cabernet. There's some real elegance to it. I almost think of Nebbiolo as being like the Actually, there's a great analogy of it as being like the ballerina with boxing gloves, because there's something really pretty, very elegant about it, but then there's just like power and strength behind it at the same time, and then those tannins. But yeah, you typically do get that kind of haunting, like rose petal, dried cherry, amaro,
Yeah.
balsamic. But then you get this muscle and meat that kind of backs it up. So it's kind of it's an interesting wine. It's a bit of a dichotomy. And that
Yeah.
power is also in part due to its youth. I mean, this is the current release.
Right.
And I think Spectator themselves said, this is going to drink good in 2023 to, and
Exactly.
on.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
needs some time.
Which I think is that for a lot of wine collectors out there, and I kind of fancy myself as one. I have a nice little under my stairs location where I keep a few hundred
That's right.
bottles,
Yeah.
and some of those things are, I've got 15, 20-year-olds. I've got a great wine from well, I won't say the brand, but it's it's an excellent one. We're going to get a chance to drink it and hopefully do one here on the show.
Great.
Let's go to number 6, and
Okay.
that's the Kistler Chardonnay, Russian River,
Yes.
of course. This
Yeah.
is the Vine Hill Vineyard, 2017. High score here, 96 points, and also I think a reasonable price at $90 a bottle. Your thoughts on this one? I mean, kind of that citrusy apple approach. Your
sure.
thoughts on that? Because for me, a Chard, I'm always looking for that buttery approach. What do you think about this one?
You know what I love about Kistler in general, but and this one is no exception, is there's an incredible richness to these wines that doesn't come from just like full throttle ripeness, heavy oak, heavy mallow. There's a creaminess that takes place with a lot of developing. The clusters in this specific vineyard they tend to have very small berries, and so you get a lot of concentration of flavor. But then the wine is barrel fermented, it's aged on the lees or the yeast for a year, and then it's not fined or filtered. So when you look at it, it's not a crystal clear, sparkly white wine. There's a little bit of a cloudiness to it. And I think that really is a reflection also on the texture on it. When you taste this wine, there's a real richness and a roundness and softness that's really pleasing. This is a beautiful wine. It's a very well crafted wine. Yeah.
And I think a good price point for a restaurant operator who's maybe looking for something on the upper end for his white section.
It's a great luxury Chardonnay.
One of those great ones, I think, because that's a lot of times is usually missing on a wine list. I've noticed more and more Chards that kind of go down in, I won't call them cheap, but they're less expensive. And for somebody who does like a Chard, especially with something like a high-end seafood dinner, you really kind of want to ramp that up a little bit. And I've noticed that is a missing element. So for all you, beverage managers out there, maybe this is one of those that you'd like to take a look at. All right, so let's jump into number 5. This was another one that was a bit unknown by me. I did quite a bit of research. I'm going to chop up the name fairly well, but it's a Domaine de la Ville Julienne, which is the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. This is a 2016. 96, also $90, which this was something that I appreciated with Wine Spectator. I don't know if it was an intention or if it was just happenstance in their discovery of wines this year, but they really had some good values, I think, in the top 10. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah. I agree with you on the values. There are some good surprises, and you're right. You can spend a lot of money on great Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and you don't have to at the same time. And I like this wine. It's got a great history to it. I think one of the things that's really unique here is that their vineyards are actually all contiguous. Most of these really old historic regions, you'll find the vineyards are all broken up, and that's due to Napoleonic law and the demand that you break up your property between all of your children, and over time you end up with these like really kind of fractured domains. And this one is unique in that it's not. It's also biodynamic, which is a little easier to do in a hot, dry place, but still not easy. And it's just really traditional, really classic Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but it's clean, really Grenache heavy. It's very ripe. It's plush. It's herbal. I love it. To me, this just tastes like the south of France. It tastes like Herbe de Provence. It's really delicious.
that in its own, anything that can bring you into France has done its job. That's for sure. I was looking at the tasting notes on this one, and I had never really followed acai being kind of used in a tasting note before, at least
Yeah.
to an extent. So that was kind of new to me, especially when you look at what most people are kind of finding in that palate when they try to
Right.
taste a wine. So this is going to be one that I think will be pleasing to a lot of people. That is for sure.
For
And I
sure.
love the fact that you picked up on kind of that earthiness back in for this one as well. Let's go to number 4, which is an interesting one as well. It's the Mayacamas
Yeah.
Cabernet Sauvignon out of Mount Veeder, which is one of my favorite vineyards, 2016. It's a 96. This one also comes in at $135 a bottle. Let's just jump right into this one. I think this was a good selection for the top 10. It's one of the ones I really said, hey, I've had it before. I know a little bit about this wine, and it definitely is a solid one. What are your thoughts on this one?
I was surprised to see this in the top 10 this year, only because it was number 2 last year. So to see
Yeah.
them put it in right at the top 2 years in a row, it does speak to the wine. The wine is spectacular.
It's like, hey, man, share the wealth out here.
I know, right? But the wines are great. I mean, it was a glorious vintage. It was kind of one of the last glorious vintages of recent, because you think about it, as you go into like 17, 18, 19, we had fires and a lot of heat and lots of problems. But what I like about these wines is that not only is it mountainside fruit, which has beautiful restraint, but these guys have just been staunchly traditional in their winemaking. They are not going for full throttle style wines. There's a real elegance to them. They are making the wines in neutral oak. They're aging them, 32 to 36 months. So it's a very long time. That takes a real commitment to your end product and not rushing it. And it really shows. I mean, this is a wine with so much complexity. When in a sea of very heavy-handed Cabernets, this is just so incredibly nuanced.
Interesting. I'm kind of curious, when you look at wines in terms of aging and their process, because they do go very extensive on that approach. Do you find more vineyards going in that direction, or is it kind of very rare occasions where that's being used in terms of a tactic?
It sort of depends. A lot of high-end wineries, you'll see them using new oak because they can afford it. And it's a very luxurious flavor that you get off of new oak. Lots of intense vanilla and very sexy, like caramel toast and spice notes. But what's happening when you're aging your wine in wood is you're not just picking up oak flavor, but there's also this exchange that's happening between the wine and the wood. And the wine is actually reducing. It's literally evaporating through the wood, and they're topping it off, but it's concentrating in flavors. It's rounding out and softening. And so by aging an older oak for this longer time, they're getting that incredible complexity and that deeper gentle oxidation in the wine, and without hitting it heavily with a lot of new oak. And it's that time is in some ways just as expensive as new oak, but it means they're having to hold back, not release their wines quite as soon, and so that's that. But what you get as a result now is a wine that's not dominated by oak. And sometimes you get these wines that's really all you can taste. The structure of this wine is really built on acidity, which also gives those wines their longevity. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. At least I think when you have a vineyard that really kind of takes that approach towards their strategy on distribution. I mean, because that's costly to do. It's very, very difficult as well.
Absolutely.
And I think when someone steps up to the plate and does that, it's kind of like the guys at Secret Door and kind of how their approach.
Right.
Very similar to that in the sense of being very selective on the grade, very selective on the process, and I think they do a good job. All right, so we're going to taste this one. This is our number 3 with this, which is the San Filippo Brunello, and this is a 2015 97 score. Came in at $90 a bottle. While you're giving me the tasting, yeah, it's again back to I think this was maybe this was the COVID list. It was like, hey, everybody, so. we need to back these off a bit. we need a good value for everyone and go that direction.
For sure.
Kind of your thoughts on this wine before I get into the taste.
Well, I wasn't surprised to see a Brunello on this list. 2015 was really a gangbuster year for this region, and the wines are just absolutely incredible, really dynamic. And so like I said, I kind of expected them to put a Brunello in the mix because they just done a big article about them and a review of the wines, and this one's really fantastic. It's just gorgeous. It's really effusive. It has all of the opulence up front right now, and it's certainly one that's going to be drinking great for a long time. I
Right.
love Brunello. They're very, very unique wines. Sangiovese, but it's its own clone of Sangiovese that's specific to this region.
Yeah, and with this one, because this is one that I kind of looked at on the top 5, that I was like, all right, out of the top 5, if I really start dissecting the list of the top 10, this is one that I could see coming in on a restaurant menu, or somebody that's looking to kind of expand their palate for their own collection. A little bit different, definitely. Ooh, color is amazing on this.
Right. Well, it's funny. You've got these two side by side. I mean, these are some of the most powerful and also sometimes the most tannic wines in Italy. These are both great wines. But what is nice is that there's a lot of sort of relatively unknown wineries in this top 10 list. There's some pretty famous ones, but then there's ones like this of all of the big famous Brunello producers out there. This is not what I would call one of the mainstream ones. So it's nice to see them getting some good press.
Yeah, good to see that. You're right. The tannins are trying to crawl out of this glass.
Yeah, to make your face.
A little bit less, of course, than the Barolo.
Yeah.
Wow, that's got a very good back note to it. Currant, maybe some interesting.
Yeah.
That's
lots of violet,
that's a good
and blueberry, and leather.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, just really powerful wine.
That I think is one that definitely deserved the list this year. Not that many of them did not, but there are some on there that obviously are
it makes sense,
in my opinion, are a bit questionable. Which this one's kind of cool too. Again, it's one of those wines that you want to kind of put in your cellar, in your wine cases, and let them kind of hold on for some future years, for them to be able to, get really the quality, I think, out of a wine that you want. And I think, in today's day and age, that's hard for a wine enthusiast. I know it's hard for me. You get a brand new vineyard and it's like, oh gosh, I just want to crack that bottle open. But it's
true.
like, just bury it where I don't see it. I don't want to, let me discover it in a couple years.
Yeah. That's the key.
Underneath the stairs.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to number 2, which is the Aubert Pinot Noir Sonoma Coast Vineyard 2018. 95 points, $85. Another great value, just really hitting the mark here. Your thoughts on this one?
This was not a surprise to see on this list. I mean, this is one of the really one of the blue chip Pinot Noirs from California. Yeah. It is just incredibly elegant. This is the UV vineyard that this comes from is named after Ulysses Valdez, who was one of the great Mexican grape growers in the state, and who's was long sought for planting. Like the greatest vineyards, he planted all of them. And this is a wine that comes from the Sonoma coast. And so for Pinot Noir, this is a much cooler area. You have all that fog that comes in all summer long. And so you're kind of on the razor's edge of ripeness. And so you have this real elegance in the wines. They're really driven by acidity. They're elegant. They're long-lived. They're pretty. They're ethereal. But this also has some nice power behind it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think as we look up the, kind of up the line, a lot of California's wines, I think this year, I kind of anticipated that we would not see much from the West Coast, but I was a bit surprised in the top 100 of how much we had of American vineyards in there. So if you haven't had a chance to, check out Wine Spectator's Top 100, you got to go to it because there's some great values in it this year.
Absolutely.
I was just discovering some amazing ones in there. All right, so you've been waiting for the number 1, which is a Bodegas Marquez de Moreta Roja Castillo Diego Cans Reserva Especial.
It's a mouthful.
Something like that.
It's a mouthful, yes.
And it's a 2010.
Yeah.
This is a 96, 139 in your price category, and of course, some very interesting and I think traditional tasting elements, for this wine. Your thoughts on this one? Did it deserve the
Well,
number one?
It's yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are
Okay, all right,
spectacular
there you
wines.
go.
It's it wasn't a head scratcher for me to see it in this list. Marquita
Okay,
Merietta is always made fabulous Riojas. The Castillo Ygay is really special in that they only make it in great years, so you don't see it every year. And it's also Grand Reserva, which means that it has been given that extra extended aging. I mean, 2010,
right.
that is the current vintage. What
Wow.
I like about this, though, is that a lot of times, traditionally in Rioja, you see these wines that are aged in American oak, and for these Grand Reservas, they've been aged for such a long time in this oak that the oak really dominates, and they get this kind of dill flower sort of aroma that really dominates the wine. And this is aged in French oak, which is a little bit more of a modern take in some ways, for Rioja. And I think that it really does this wine a lot of favors. You still get a lot of that really strong oak influence, but it's not quite as sweet, not quite as like creme brulee. You get a lot more of the like vanilla and baking spice, and it
Right.
just adds a lot of great complexity. When you see these wines with this much age, especially in oak, and where the wood is really starting to sap a lot of the intense fruit character out of the wine, and you get the secondaries aromas of like orange peel and dried roses and tea and dried cherry as opposed to fresh cherry. The complexity is just really alluring.
Yeah, I got a chance to taste this one with a som here in South Florida,
Hmm. Right.
and she did a great job. We were trying to scrap together some of the top 10 and being able to get to all of them.
Yeah.
And then
Not easy.
just finding the top 10 available
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
another, challenge. We went with number 3 and number 7, for our tasting notes here today. But I
Yeah.
was really impressed with just the overall list this year from Wine Spectator. They always do a great job. That's for sure. I think
Hmm.
this is the year, if you're a restaurant operator that's looking to invest in your wine cellar, this might be the year to grab some top 10s because the prices are
Absolutely.
good value. If
Hmm.
you can find the cases out there, get them in your wine cellar, start stacking them in there and getting them ready for a few years down the road. I think this is a good investment year
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree.
All right. Emily, it's always great talking to you. I love to get your insights. You always have so much depth on these vineyards, which is kind of the backstory of a lot of these wines. And a lot of people I don't necessarily know that much. When they go into it, they kind of learn a little bit about the wine, but they don't really learn a lot about the winemakers.
Mhm.
And that's always a great add-on that we love to have on the show here today. So thanks again for stopping in on this year's top 10 out of the top
Yeah,
100 Wine Spectators list. Thanks so much.
it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Alrighty. So all of you listening in here on Taste Kitchen, watching, maybe you're going for some great wine notes this year, make sure and check out our past top 10 videos that we've had. Emily's been on one of those. We've had several Soms. We are also coming in with another great wine video, I think, on undervalued wines for 2021. We will be doing that one soon, so make sure and stay tuned right here on Foodable Network for that great content. If you have an idea for the show and here in Taste Kitchen, maybe you have a product that you think should make it here to Taste Kitchen, just shoot that over to us at producer@foodabletv.com. You can always hit me up on Twitter @PaulBaron. It's great seeing you guys. Hopefully, 2021 is going to be much better, and Happy New Year if you guys are not already out there having a great one. Make sure and do. We'll check you next time right here on Taste Kitchen.